landed on are horizontal stacked centrifugal booster pumps. They'll provide you with the same type of capacity and pressure that you can get from your existing pumps, but they operate in a bit more of an efficient manner. And pumping efficiency means a couple of things for you. It means that your power usage will go down because the motors are operating more efficiently. And it also has to do with the longevity of the pumps. Pumps that operate at a more efficient point, you can expect to have a longer lifespan than those that are operating sort of outside of the most efficient point in the operating curves. So we've settled on a bit of a change to your well house with some more efficient pumps, but not increasing the capacity. I know when we met, I guess it was back towards the beginning of this calendar year, Danny, we talked about the need for this project. It's something that I know you've had on your books for a little while. And initially we started down the road of trying to procure some public financing for the project. The project has even gone through some of those steps. We've gone through the Water and Wastewater Advisory Committee and received approval from that board. However, sort of midstream, we decided to back up. Let's take a different approach. And now I understand that the district is going to be self-financing the project. That allows us to move a little more quickly through the process, but we did have to sort of move from a funding phase into a design phase, which is where we're at currently. If you look at the exhibits that I prepared for you, the first one has a bit of a color image on it, and you can see the general vicinity, the location of your well number 5. It's there near the intersection of Wild Turkey and I believe that's Country. Yes, thank you. I'm sorry, I had it covered up with a label there, and my vision is increasingly getting worse. But that is the general location of it. Then in the lower right-hand quadrant of that sheet, you'll see sort of an overall site view. Driveway coming up, it's a gravel driveway, fairly steep driveway, to get to the site. The existing booster pump station sort of sits on the southern edge of that site, and we'd be proposing to build the new station towards the northern edge of the lot there. Again, no need to increase capacity from the well. We'd be using the existing well and tying it over sort of at the end of construction, changing where the wellhead currently leads to the existing booster station over into the new booster station. The improvements would also include updates to your generator, your emergency power generator, transfer switch, and obviously all the electrical and controls associated with the pumps. So we get you updated there as well. Flipping over to the second sheet, again, this is a conceptual floor plan giving you some details of what we envision for this booster station. As you may be aware, coming out of the well, we have to do some treatment of your water. And so we have a dedicated treatment apparatus in the well station. It's chlorination for disinfection, which is similar to what you're doing now, although we'd be making some improvements to what you're doing there as well. I think Dan would corroborate this. It's basically a bare bones type system. It gets the job done, but there's really no frills or flash at all. We'd be building in some additional redundancy, giving you a second disinfection point. Right now you just have the one, providing a backup injection pump and giving you some enhanced monitoring of your chlorine residual compared to what you have now. It would allow Dan and your operations staff to make readings there at the booster station and determine what is the chlorine residual at that point. And then they can correlate that to what would the residual be out at your most remote reaches of the distribution system. Currently, it's more of a kind of dial it in and then we'll go check and see, what the reaction is out in the system and make adjustments if needed. And that's worked for years, but this can give you a little bit of additional coverage, sort of some safety factor, and some more information. More information for your operations staff is never bad. After it passes through the disinfection process, then we'd go through the booster pumps where you're increasing the pressure in the system so that you can fill your storage tanks out in the collection system. I didn't want to get overly technical this morning, but I wanted to bring some exhibits to kind of give you a feel for what we're working on. Obviously, this is not construction level documents, which we're working to prepare for you. And of course, we need to have some further consultation with Dan, I believe, and finalize some of these ideas.
Some of the aging process that's going on in the current well house is due to the proximity of the chlorination. And I see we've still got it in the same building that isolated, I assume that's like a concrete block wall there. Is it isolated so that 20 years, 30 years down the road, we wouldn't see the damage being done from the chlorine?
That's a great question. It is isolated in its own building. That's pretty typical, and when you're working with chlorine, you want that isolation because chlorine is a toxic gas. If there was a leak, you would want it isolated so that it wouldn't infiltrate the rest of the building. Chlorine is also very corrosive, and you can see that when you go into the well house, the effects of chlorine gas over time. I won't tell you that what we are going to build is chlorine proof. There's almost nothing that is chlorine proof. But what we will do is we'll have special coatings on the interior walls of the chlorination room. We'll use special coatings on the piping in the room. I believe it'll be an improvement from what you have, but those coatings will need to be maintained over time in order to maintain their resiliency to the chlorine gas. Even stainless steel is not immune to the effects of chlorine. So pulling it outside and having its own dedicated building could maybe isolate you, the remainder of the building, although that is a sealed room, but you still have the chlorination building itself as a separate building. In that instance, you'd still have to stay on top of it, maintaining the so you don't end up with further corrosion.
Okay.
Dedicated building with just the one dedicated room.
That's correct.
Just the one entrance from the front.
Yes, ma'am, that's correct. And details of the building construction, yes, it's a block building, and the block wall that isolates the chlorine room would be, totally filled. The blocks would be solid, filled with grout, so there wouldn't be any way for it to penetrate through.
Second question, Jeff. You talked at all about the wellhead itself and the piping going into the well.
Yes.
It was my understanding when we lost well number one a year ago, the wet pail was underground. Are we going to do anything as well?
Well, we don't have any money or any plans currently to replace the well pump. It's my understanding that has been replaced fairly recently.
All the piping, all the wire. That one, well, one was, it's a vertical turbine pump. So the vertical, there's a shaft that goes all the way down. motor's up on top. And, the outer casing developed a hole in it. So what we did, we went back with submersible, so the motor's down at the bottom, pushing it up through the pipe. Well 1 and well 5 and also well 4, so they're all submersibles.
Dan, any idea how old that piping and pump
Oh,
are
it's-
on well 5?
Back and look exact date, it's placed in. I don't know, it's only been there maybe years.
Oh, okay. So all that piping that we see outside of the well house,
That's
the
all
current
they-
well house, that's the remnants from that project? Okay, great, thank you.
You mentioned earlier about the capacity and the population here. We're at about 20. Slowed down quite a bit since I've been here 16 years, but what, are you looking at this to be sufficient for 3,000 residents or what?
What we did, is we looked out to a 20-year design horizon, which is typical for infrastructure, of this sort. And, Holiday Island, we don't anticipate to have a really steep growth curve over the next 20 years. It's growing very slowly, and we believe that you have adequate capacity, with your existing wells to provide for the next 20 years. Projecting out much beyond 20 becomes somewhat problematic. Even 20 can be challenging at times, but beyond 20, it becomes much more difficult.
Also, what percentage of water that's being used is from that well? You mentioned it, but.
I wish I had those numbers in front of me. I believe, if my memory serves me right, it is 55 to 60% of the production for the main land. The island has a well it sort of operates as its own system, even though technically it's connected. I believe it's being operated as its own system. So of the mainland production, it's around 55 to 60%. And it fluctuates from month to month just based on hydraulics, but that's on average.
I'll ask a couple later, I'll give you the commission chance.
Well, you'll understand, I've only had water well 101. So,
That's okay, that's most people.
so I just want to be sure I understand this. Essentially, what we're gonna be doing is building a brand new building and putting brand new equipment in it that's all gonna replace that corroded equipment that's in the current building. And that the wellhead is actually outside of this building, correct?
That's correct. So looking at that first exhibit where you have the image in the upper left.
Yes.
And in that lower right-hand quadrant of the sheet, you'll see the building, the existing building is towards the south and of the site. And the well itself is slightly north, like right off the northeast corner of the existing building.
Oh, it's Fish Park, existing well.
Yes. So the water comes up out of the ground from that point, and then it's piped into the building,
To this building.
from the wellhead into the existing building. We would be modifying nothing underground, just, once it's up above ground.
And that's-
where we'd be making the modification.
That's this diagram that shows influent from wellhead?
So yes, if you look on the second figure, that's correct. From the wellhead, that's the water coming up out of the ground. And it first passes through your chlorination system, sort of in that isolated room.
Okay.
It would wrap kind of behind the building and then back through the building for the booster pumping itself.
Booster pumps push it up to the water tower.
That's correct. They essentially add pressure to the system so that you can fill the storage tanks in your system. And then from there, it feeds, storage tanks feed by gravity into the system. Your pumps also feed directly into the system, so you get a little bit of redundancy there.
Thank you.
Yeah, if you have questions,
Oh.
let's do it.
Have you, I know you told the city your phone works all over. Did one like this recently, and the result of what we do.
Well, each, I is unique. It typically presents its own challenges and solutions. But we did recently do a new well house building for the town of Omaha, which is north of Harrison, kind of on your way to, you